In April 1997, a team of investigators working in a rural field near the village of Se Semayang made a discovery that would horrify a nation. What they unearthed wasn't a single body or a random grave. It was a pattern, a deliberate one. Dozens of female corpses arranged in a perfect circle. Each woman had been buried in a seated position, partially submerged in the earth, as if someone had placed them with care and precision. But the most disturbing detail wasn't just the number of bodies. It was their orientation. Every one of them faced the same direction, toward a modest bamboo-walled house standing at the edge of the field. That house belonged to Ahmad Siraji. Locals knew him as a dukan, a spiritual healer, someone to turn to for love spells, fertility blessings, and protection from misfortune. In many parts of Indonesia, a dukan is more than a healer. He's a priest, a guide, a voice of ancient power. And to most people in Se Semayang, Siraji was exactly that. Someone you respected, someone you didn't question. And that made him all the more dangerous. For over a decade, women had come to him willingly. Some were referred by friends, others had heard of his reputation. They brought money, personal items, hopes, and trust, believing he would fix what was broken in their lives. And then, they vanished. It wasn't until 21-year-old Sri Kamala Dewi failed to return home after visiting Siraji that someone finally asked the right questions. Her belongings were later found near his property, and with that, the house of cards began to fall. The investigation that followed exposed a chilling scale of murder, calculated, ritualized, and, as the killer himself claimed, divinely inspired. During questioning, Siraji gave a statement that stunned even hardened officers. He said that in a dream, the spirit of his deceased father appeared to him and gave him a command. You must kill 70 women and drink their saliva. Only then will you gain the power you seek. To him, it wasn't about hate or revenge. It was a spiritual obligation, a ritual that had to be completed. As the digging continued, it became clear that this field wasn't just a burial site. It was a map, a physical representation of a belief system that had quietly taken root and grown under the cover of tradition, reverence, and silence. But what may have looked like delusion from the outside was, in truth, something far more complex. Because before the first victim ever died, a legend had already begun to form. A man with a gift, a father, a husband, a spiritual leader. No one imagined that in his world, even death could be ritualized and made sacred. Did Siraji truly believe in his mission? Or did he simply manipulate the beliefs of others to mask his own darkness? The answer may lie in the place where it all began, in the shadow of a father, and a promise that became an obsession. Before the name Ahmad Siraji was associated with horror, he was seen as something entirely different, a figure of respect. He wasn't just tolerated by the community, he was trusted, admired, even feared, in the way one fears forces they do not fully understand. Born in 1949 near Medan, on the Indonesian island of Sumatra, Siraji grew up in a household where mysticism wasn't fantasy. It was fact. His father, also a dukan, had been well known in the region. From a young age, Ahmad was exposed to rituals, spiritual chants, and the complex language of local magic. He didn't just inherit a reputation, he inherited a role. One that came with both power and expectation. In many rural Indonesian communities, a dukun is not seen as an outlier. He's an integral part of everyday life. People go to the doctor when they're sick, but they go to a dukun when they're afraid of curses, infertility, bad luck, betrayal. A dukun offers more than remedies. He offers control over things people can't explain. By the time he reached adulthood, Siraji had become a respected spiritual authority in the region. He performed rituals, gave advice, and claimed to communicate with ancestral spirits. People believed him, not because he was charismatic, but because his presence came wrapped in layers of tradition and cultural legitimacy. But behind that aura of wisdom and spiritual calm, something had begun to shift. Suraji later claimed that, following his father's death, he began to experience vivid dreams. In one of them, the spirit of his father appeared and delivered a single, chilling command. You must kill 70 women and drink their saliva. Only then will you gain unimaginable power. He did not doubt what he saw. For him, the dream wasn't symbolic. It was sacred instruction, one that required action, not interpretation. And so, quietly and methodically, he began preparing. He didn't need to seek out his victims. They came to him. They came believing he could bless their marriages, cure their ailments, solve the intangible problems they dared not speak of elsewhere. And because he was a dukun, they trusted him without question. By the time he took his first life, the groundwork had already been laid. The belief, the authority, the secrecy, all the conditions were in place. What remained was execution, literally, and he wasn't alone. Ahmad Siraji lived with 3 wives, all of whom knew of his practice. One of them would eventually admit to helping lure women in. Others, he claimed, helped him dig graves. What emerges from this portrait is not a madman in isolation, but a man who built a system around himself, a system rooted in fear, silence, and inherited power. As more women began to disappear, no one thought to question the man they saw as a gatekeeper to the spirit world. And as that belief deepened, so did the grave. When a woman arrived at Ahmad Siraji's home, she didn't see danger. She saw hope, wrapped in incense smoke, whispered prayers, and quiet authority. Many of them were young. Some were just teenagers. Others were newly married or desperately seeking answers after repeated miscarriages. All of them believed they were in the presence of someone who could shift the tide of their fate. Siraji would greet them with calm. He would speak of energies, of spirits, of balance in the universe. The sessions were held late, always at night, when the veil between the physical and spiritual was believed to be thinnest. There was a pattern to it, a rhythm, one that never changed. He instructed the women to bring personal objects, rings, necklaces, combs, photos, small tokens believed to carry emotional or spiritual weight. Then came the ritual itself. He would ask them to remove their clothing from the waist up, explaining that the body needed to be purified and open to receive the energy. They were told to enter a shallow hole in the ground, already prepared in advance. The women stepped in willingly, standing waist deep in soil. They believed it was part of the blessing. Then came the moment no one ever expected. Without warning, he would strangle them, using his hands or a length of wire. Some deaths were quick, others not. In every case, he claimed, he followed a specific protocol. After the victim stopped moving, he would collect her saliva, using a cup, or sometimes by tilting her head. He drank it, not for satisfaction, but for strength. To him, the saliva carried life essence, the very soul of the person, and absorbing it was the key to unlocking his promised power. Then he buried the body fully, still in a seated position, and aligned it with geometric precision. Each grave was placed facing his home, like silent sentinels pointing their energy inward. He believed their spirits would remain connected to him, that each woman brought him closer to the final goal. By the time authorities discovered the graves, there were over 40, and yet no one in the village had seen or heard a thing. Many of the women had been brought there not just by word of mouth, but in some cases, by Siraji's own wives. At least one of them helped convince clients to follow through with the ritual, fully believing in its spiritual purpose. Others, according to Siraji, assisted with burial. These were not crimes of rage or opportunity. They were ritual executions, carried out by someone who believed he was fulfilling a sacred obligation. But every system eventually fails. and every belief, no matter how deeply rooted, eventually collides with reality. And for Ahmad Siraji, that moment was approaching, faster than he could have anticipated, because one of his victims had left a trace. For over a decade, no one asked the right questions. Women went missing, and the answers, if any were offered, came cloaked in silence or superstition. Families grieved quietly. Police reports, if they were filed at all, went nowhere. But in 1997, that silence broke. Her name was Shri Kamala Dewi. She was 21 years old, and like so many others, she had visited Ahmad Siraji in search of help. What she wanted, according to her friends, was simple: a ritual to bring stability to a troubled relationship. She believed in the process, and she believed in the Dukan who offered it. When she didn't return home, her family panicked. Unlike many previous victims, Shri had told someone where she was going. She left a name, a location, a sense of time. That trail, however faint, was all the authorities needed. A search led investigators to the outskirts of Siraji's property. There, they found her belongings: a purse, scattered items, and a piece of identification half buried in the soil. Police brought him in for questioning. He was calm, cooperative. His answers were vague, but he didn't panic. He had learned over the years how to mask lies with ritual language. He spoke about healing, about cleansing, about energy. But the officers had already decided to search the land. What they found, just meters from his home, was the first of many graves. Shri's body was discovered in a seated position, partially decomposed, aligned with uncanny precision. Nearby, the earth gave way to more and more. In the days that followed, the property became a scene of controlled chaos. Dozens of graves. Forensic teams worked under floodlights. Photographers documented everything. Local villagers stood at the edge of the police cordon, stunned into silence. When confronted with the evidence, Siraji confessed, not just to Shri's murder, but to 42 others. He spoke of the dream, the prophecy, the goal of 70 souls. And he described it all not with regret, but with a kind of reverence, as if he still believed that what he had done was part of a divine process. His wives were also questioned. One admitted to helping lure women in. Another had assisted in burying the bodies. To them, it wasn't murder. It was destiny, a calling they believed they were chosen to fulfill. But the courts would see it differently. The village that once called him healer would now call him monster. And for the man who spent years controlling life and death like elements in a sacred formula, his final ritual was no longer his to perform. The trial of Ahmad Siraji began in 1998 under intense media scrutiny and public fascination. By then, his crimes had already reached international headlines, and his name had become synonymous with evil cloaked in ritual. But inside the courtroom, what unfolded wasn't a scene of madness or remorse. What prosecutors encountered was something far more unnerving. A man utterly convinced that he had done nothing wrong. Siraji sat silently through most of the proceedings, composed, almost detached. When asked to describe his actions, he answered with clinical precision, not to shock, but as if he were explaining the steps of a spiritual procedure handed down from a higher power. He told the court the same story he had told police, that in a dream his deceased father had given him a divine command. 70 women must die. Their spirits will empower you. Their saliva will bind their energy to yours. He spoke these words not as a defense, but as a statement of faith. The evidence was overwhelming. Dozens of bodies had been found on his property, many still wearing jewelry or clothing later identified by grieving families. Some bore signs of physical struggle. Others had been buried so carefully that it resembled an offering, not a crime scene. Photographs, autopsy reports, witness testimonies, all painted the same picture: a systematic campaign of murder conducted under the guise of spiritual ritual. 2 of Siraji's wives were also tried for complicity. One admitted she had helped dig the graves. Another, confessed to luring at least a handful of women to their deaths. But it was Ahmad who remained at the center, the architect, the believer, the executioner. After months of testimony, the court delivered its verdict. Death, the sentence. Execution by firing squad, the standard method in Indonesia for the gravest crimes. It was a punishment steeped in finality, a state ritual for a man who had created his own. For over 10 years, Siraji sat on death row at Nusa Kambangan prison. During that time, he gave few interviews. He never expressed regret. He never renounced his beliefs. On the night of July 10th, 2008, shortly after midnight, he was led from his cell. He was blindfolded, bound, and taken to a field. There, under the watch of armed officers, the man who once believed he could absorb the power of spirits met a very human end, a volley of gunfire in the dark. His body was returned to his family. There was no ceremony, no public mourning. But while his life ended, something else remained. Because for the people of Semayang, and for all those who still remember the quiet field behind his house, the memory never left. And some still wonder what power, if any, lingered in the soil he so carefully claimed. Years have passed since Ahmad Siraji was executed. His home is gone. The field has been cleared. The case is closed. But the story refuses to die. Ask the locals in Semayang what became of the land behind Siraji's former house, and they'll lower their voices. They'll tell you that nothing grows well there, that no one dares to build, to plant, or even walk across it at night. Some speak of visions, pale shapes in the dark, sounds that echo without source. Others say nothing at all. They simply avoid the place, as if the earth remembers. Technically, the bodies are gone. The graves were exhumed, the site thoroughly documented. But trauma, unlike bone, cannot be removed so easily. In Javanese and Sumatran tradition, death leaves a residue, especially when it's violent, unfinished, or denied spiritual closure. The field where Siraji performed his killings is seen by many as spiritually contaminated, not haunted in the Western sense, something older, heavier, a wound in the land. And yet, what lingers isn't only fear of ghosts or spirits. It's the realization that something like this could happen at all, not in secret, but in full view. That a man could wrap horror in ritual and be celebrated for it. That belief, when left unchecked, can become a weapon sharper than any blade. Today, Siraji's story is studied in universities. It appears in criminology lectures, documentaries, podcasts. His name has become a cautionary tale. But in Semayang, it's something different. It's not history, it's a presence. Because the truth is, monsters don't always live in the shadows. Sometimes they wear the robes of wisdom. Sometimes they speak in blessings. Sometimes they build their altar just beyond the edge of the village path. And even long after they're gone, something in the earth keeps listening. If this story stayed with you, if you're drawn to the dark corners of history where truth is stranger than legend, then consider subscribing to Duskwoven. Because the past doesn't sleep, and we're just getting started.